amidst all the confusion and all the stuff about procedure, I want to sort of center things a little bit. The problem for President Joe Biden and Democrats right now is pretty clear. With the narrowest possible majority in the Senate, they need all 50 Democratic senators to agree, again, unanimously on legislation. And 2 Democrats have emerged as the face of opposition to the party's agenda. There's West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Now, say what you will about Senator Manchin, but he represents a state Donald Trump won by nearly 40 points in 2020, and he also has explicitly articulated the basis of his opposition to the current Biden agenda proposal. He thinks $3.5 trillion price tag, again, over 10 years, and also that's just the spending side, not the taxes side. He thinks that's too high. He wants more means testing and work requirements to limit the scope of some of the benefits of the bill. And I think he is dangerously, destructively wrong about the substance and the politics. But at least those are tangible demands. To quote the Big Lebowski, at least it's an ethos. When it comes to Senator Sinema, we don't know exactly what her objections are. In fact, not entirely clear she's invested in advancing the agenda at all. And her tenure in the Senate has essentially been, well, quite focused on looking out for wealthy and special interests at the expense of her constituents. Like during last year's summer recess, a time when most senators spend with their families and their districts, instead, Sinema attended a paid winemaking internship in California at a winery that also held a fundraiser for her campaign, run by a founder of one of the country's largest private equity firms, a firm which donated $6,800 to her campaign. I mean, I guess that would be fun, but I don't know. You really need to look no further than what Senator Sinema was doing today. She met with the White House twice on the future of the bill. I think she's going back a third time, I just saw before we got on air. And then, while Democrats were feverishly working to put together a compromise she will support, the New York Times reports her schedule included a fundraiser with 5 special interest groups looking to kill the legislation, ready to write checks for between $1,000 and nearly $6,000 to Sinema. Now, I may not agree with Senator Manchin's politics, but it does seem like he's articulating things he wants and is trying to get to yes. Senator Sinema, on the other hand, has been spending her time basically alternating between a vineyard internship and getting checks from lobbyist groups. Donna Edwards is a Washington Post columnist, previously represented the Maryland's 4th Congressional District in Congress, where she served alongside then Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema, and she joins me now. What do you think about, I have found Joe Manchin's explicitly articulated objections in some ways reassuring, because as Faz Shakir, who used to work for Harry Reid, said, you can't negotiate if you're not getting counters. At least that's something to work with. I don't know what is going on with Sinema. What do you think of that read on the difference between those two right now?
Well, I think you've got it exactly right. I mean, it does seem to me that at least publicly, Senator Manchin has articulated his concerns with the legislation and is actively working to try to negotiate. I think that he wants to get to yes. And you know, my concern about Senator Sinema, apart from the fundraising, which I think is very, very problematic, one of the reasons that we need the For the People Act to pass. But if you look at the voters in Arizona, this is overwhelmingly supported by a majority of voters in Arizona. And among Democrats, also her constituents, the numbers are in the 90s in terms of support for the Build Back Better agenda. And so it is the president's agenda. And I'm concerned about any senator, any Democratic senator who would put on the line to possibly tank the president's agenda, because that effectively takes Democrats out of the running for the majority in the House and in the Senate. It's very problematic.
Yeah, the polling on Sinema is fascinating. We got this new polling data for progress of this poll. So you've got a little bit of a test case. You've got Sinema and Kelly, right? And they're both from the same state. They have similar overall numbers, but Kelly's very, very approved by Democrats and very disapproved by Republicans. Sinema has much lower approval among Democrats, higher approval against Republicans, although when you are in a race against a Republican, it's unclear how much that's going to help you. And they both won their seats, right? So these are different approaches here. As someone who served with her in the House, do you have a read on what's...
Well, I mean, my experience of Senator Sinema when she was in the House is that she did spend a lot of time, caucusing with Republicans, even on very minor issues. And so I think this is a long-standing problem, and it is, it's a challenge, I think, for the majority leader, for Senator Schumer, in trying to make sure that there are 50 votes in support of the Build Back Better plan, as well as the infrastructure that's already passed. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I do think part of the answer is Arizona voters calling her to task. I mean, you look at that wide gap between her and Mark Kelly, who's up for re-election next year. Senator Sinema is not up until 2024, but her numbers have been going progressively down over this last year, from her vote on the minimum wage to where she is right now.
Yeah, she gave that very, very notorious thumbs down vote on the minimum wage. We have Ro Khanna, who's a current member of the House caucus, who says we have one senator from a state Biden carried, from a state where her colleague is 100% on board, holding up the agenda of the entire House of the National Democratic Party. The senator refuses to even give a number. So here's my question. When is the Democratic Party going to tell a single senator, it's time to get behind our president, it's time to get in line? I mean, the issue here is, that is true. That is the equation. The problem is, senators they're not, you can't tell them what to do. Chuck Schumer is not their boss.
Well, when I talk to both House Democrats and Senate Democrats, they're incredibly frustrated, particularly with Senator Sinema. They feel like they can work with Senator Manchin. We know that number from 3.5 trillion is going to be something different. We heard Speaker Pelosi say that, but they're not really sure what to do right now with Senator Sinema. And I do think that among Democrats across the country, and certainly in Arizona, this is not going to go down very well if the president's agenda is not passed.
Joining me now is Pennsylvania Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild. She's on a number of committees, including the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Ethics Committee. Congresswoman, good morning. You say you had a productive talk with President Biden this week about the path towards passing both bills in tandem. What programs are you prioritizing, and what are the sticking points when it comes to deciding what stays in the reconciliation package and what gets?
Well, good morning, Mehdi. We did have a productive conversation. A small group of us spoke with the president this week. My particular priority, as most people know, is Medicare negotiation of prescription drug prices, which, of course, for those who don't know, is a big part of what we call the pay for the package. It would result in huge savings for taxpayers and would go to fund a lot of really excellent programs that are contained in the bills, not to mention the fact that we've got to get these roads and bridges and drainage systems fixed and get started on those. But in the other infrastructure bill, I'm particularly excited about the prospect of a big investment in early childhood education, something this country has never seen. There have been a lot of references to FDR and so forth. Keep in mind, when the New Deal was passed, we weren't thinking about early childhood education or child care because most households were just single working parent households, and the other parent stayed home, the mother in particular. But now we know that to get our economy fully rebooted, and we've got to get women back to work. And one of the best ways to do that, and also to do really great things for their kids, is early childhood education.
But Congresswoman, just to clarify for our viewers, you know, there's lots of different camps in your party nowadays, in your caucus. Where do you stand as of this moment in terms of both bills passing?
I don't think there's any choice at this point, Mehdi. I mean, I would have liked to see the original bipartisan infrastructure bill voted on, but that day has come and gone, and I am completely on board with passing these two together. They are now inextricably linked. It's quite clear that we're not going to pass one without the other, and I feel so strongly about them that I'm fine with that. And you know, the president came in and spoke to our caucus, and I did a very good job of settling everybody down and saying, you know, the process matters. Listening to all of the legislators on their priorities really matters. And, you know, it kind of calmed. We probably never should have put an artificial deadline on when one bill was passed or the other.
Well, I guess that artificial deadline came from pressure from some on the right in your party, the Josh Gottheimers and Joe Manchins of this world, the Kyrsten Sinemas of this world. You mentioned a moment ago that you value Medicare negotiating on drug prices, something that Kyrsten Sinema told the president in the Oval Office reportedly she's against. The New York Times reporting yesterday also that Senator Kyrsten Sinema wants to cut $100 billion from the Build Back Better funding for climate change action. She's often described as a moderate senator. And I want to ask you, Congresswoman, what is moderate about letting the planet burn, about opposing the bare minimum action that has to be taken to fight climate change?
There is nothing moderate about that, Mehdi. I think you and I have had this conversation before about labels. Labels don't work, quite frankly, within the Democratic caucus. I've often thought of myself as moderate, but I fully believe that we've got to repair the effects of climate change and do everything we can to prevent any further damage to the planet. Medicare negotiation of drug prices. Senator Sinema isn't in the right party if she doesn't think that that is a good thing. And by the way, everybody should be in favor of that because, quite honestly, it's to the benefit of the American taxpayer.
Yes.
It's ridiculous that we don't negotiate prescription drug prices or that Medicare.
Yeah, and to be fair, Joe Manchin, the other holdout in the Senate, is very clear that he does support you on that and support the provision in the bill on Medicare negotiations. So we're against artificial deadlines. I think you and I can both agree on that. But when do we think, if we get our crystal ball out, that these bills will actually pass? Midterms are upon us.
Well, the artificial deadline has actually come and gone. So now we're at the point where we are going to work on getting this done as soon as possible. I don't want to create another artificial deadline, but I certainly think that it would be very reasonable to think that we will have these done well before Thanksgiving. So that's sort of my new deadline in my head, and I hope that we meet it. I don't see any reason that we wouldn't. I cannot speak for the Senate, obviously, and I'm very concerned about what's happening over there, and silence followed by what I consider to be very unreasonable positions by Senator Sinema. So I'm hopeful that there will be some movement over there and that we're going to be able to get this through, because I think we are seeing the House come together more than ever before, the Democratic caucus anyway. We all have such strong priority in that. And we recognize the cost of the bill is going to have to come down. But please, you know, climate change is not something that we should. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's a fair point when you say people coming together. We in the media often report this as a Democratic Party split. I mean, last time I checked, it was 9 House members and 2 senators, and everyone else was united. Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild of Pennsylvania, appreciate your time.